Welcome back. Tonight, we're diving into a world ruled not by kings or wars, but by the gods. Your day starts with a prayer, a splash of wine, or a simple offering left on a stone altar, because the gods are always watching and always wanting. But first, if hearing tales like this resonates with you, press the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and in the comments, let me know what time you're tuning in and what sort of rituals shape your own mornings or evenings. Now, dim the lights. You've just woken up in ancient Greece. The first thing you smell is smoke from a nearby altar. Some early risers are already burning incense to Zeus. Your feet hit cool stone as you slip into your sandals. There's no coffee brewing, but a neighbor might pour wine into the hearth for Hestia before you break your fast. Outside, you hear the distant bleating of sheep being herded to the shrine of Artemis, and the clatter of merchants laying out fresh figs near Hermes' statue in the agora. Your life is entwined with the divine before you step into the workshop to shape clay or hammer metal. You pause at a little figurine of Athena, whispering for steady hands and clever ideas. On the docks, every voyage begins and ends at an altar to Poseidon, because one wrong wave could mean disaster. When soldiers march off to battle, they gather around a grand altar to Ares, offering a goat or a cup of wine, hoping for courage and protection. Even at home, before you tend the hearthfire, you honor Hestia, trusting that her presence keeps your family safe and warm. In ancient Greece, the gods were not distant myths. They were present in wind and fire, in illness and recovery, in victory and loss. Their power shaped not only the grand sweep of fate, but also the smallest details of everyday life. Mortals lived in a world where divine forces were believed to be watching, judging, and intervening. To please them was to invite protection, prosperity, and peace. To offend them, even unknowingly, risked drought, defeat, or disaster. Honoring the gods wasn't a choice, it was a necessity, woven into the fabric of daily routines and major life events. Woven into the fabric of daily routines and major life events, each household had its hearth fire sacred to Hestia, where offerings were made at dawn and dusk. A splash of wine, a few grains of barley, a murmured prayer, small gestures meant to show gratitude, ask for favor, or ward off misfortune. Even a poor farmer would pause to offer thanks before eating, knowing that his harvest depended as much on divine goodwill as it did on hard work. In the bustling heart of cities, worship grew more elaborate. Massive temples loomed over marketplaces and gathering spaces, their columns stretching toward the heavens. Priests and priestesses, trained in sacred rites, stood as intermediaries between mortals and gods. Sacrifices of animals, carefully chosen and ritually prepared, were offered with solemnity and spectacle. The rising smoke, the scent of burning fat, the rhythmic chants and prayers all formed a bridge between the mortal and the divine. Festivals elevated this connection to its peak. These were not just religious observances, they were theatrical, athletic, and social events designed to honor a god and bring a city together in joyful reverence. In Athens, during the Panathenaic festival, the city came alive for Athena with processions, music, dance, and competition. The offering of a peplos, a finely woven robe, symbolized the city's devotion. Elsewhere, in the countryside, The rhythm of planting and harvest beat in time with rituals to Demeter and Dionysus. Villagers gave thanks with bread and wine, trusting that their devotion would ensure fertile fields and healthy livestock. Temples and sacred sites, whether grand structures or humble shrines, marked places where the divine could be approached. A soldier might pray to Ares before battle, a mother to Artemis for safe childbirth. Pilgrims traveled miles to consult oracles, believing the gods spoke through cryptic words and sacred signs. At sea, sailors stopped at Poseidon's altars, offering tokens for calm waters. The gods were everywhere, and ignoring them was unthinkable. To worship was to seek balance in a world ruled by unseen powers. It was to recognize one's place in the grand order, from the humblest farmer to the wealthiest noble, and to reach upward through smoke, song, and sacrifice, in hopes that the gods would look kindly down. You live each day under the watchful eyes of the gods, aware that your prayers and offerings set the very rhythm of your life. At dawn, you might stand before your humble hearth, offering a few drops of wine to Hestia before you taste your first meal, knowing that even this small act keeps the goddess pleased. As you move through the fields and streets, you scan sky and earth for any sign. A strange bird call, the flash of lightning, a sudden cough in a neighbor's child, each potentially signaling the favor or anger of a deity. If you hear of the oracle at Delphi, you might plan to travel there for days just to ask Apollo a question, hoping for his cryptic guidance. You pray over your seeds before planting, promise to sacrifice a ram if you win a battle, and whisper thanks when a child is born. In every moment, you feel the gods' presence pressing close, their moods shaping your fate. You leave the season's first fruits, golden sheaves of wheat, or clusters of grapes, grateful for a fruitful harvest and praying for gentle rains. Before a contest of skill or a moment of decision, you light olive oil in a lamp before Athena or Apollo, silently asking for wisdom to guide your actions or musical inspiration for your songs. When you plan a fishing trip or a hunt, you place a small clay statue of Poseidon or Artemis at the shrine, pleading for safe passage across the waves or a successful chase through the forests. Sometimes, regardless of the specific deity, you burn incense, fragrant resins, whose smoke you believe drifts toward Olympus, carrying your hopes for general blessings and protection. In your mind, good fortune is never random. A bountiful crop must be Demeter's kindness, and a sudden illness must be Apollo's displeasure. Good fortune is never random. A bountiful crop must be Demeter's kindness, and a sudden illness must be Apollo's displeasure. This constant exchange of hope and anxiety grips you and everyone around you. You worry that you might forget an essential prayer, that your offering might be too meager, or that you've accidentally offended a god by neglecting a ritual. When a festival approaches, whether grand or local, you and your neighbors prepare with feverish excitement, singing hymns and decorating altars, all eager for a moment of divine attention. But if a plague descends, or the river fails to flood its banks, guilt and fear spread swiftly. In such times, you see the whole community uniting, wealthy patricians and humble laborers alike pouring their resources into larger sacrifices, begging for relief, and renewing vows to the gods who seem just out of reach. This constant exchange of hope and anxiety grips you and everyone around you. You worry that you might forget an essential prayer, that your offering might be too meager, or that you've accidentally offended a god by neglecting a ritual. When a festival approaches, whether grand or local, you and your neighbors prepare with feverish excitement, singing hymns and decorating altars, all eager for a moment of divine attention. But if a plague descends or the river fails to flood its banks, guilt and fear spread swiftly. In such times, you see the whole community uniting, wealthy patricians and humble laborers alike, pouring their resources into larger sacrifices, begging for relief, and renewing vows to the gods who seem just out of reach. Emotion drives these rituals as much as tradition does. You might picture a mother lighting a candle at her home altar, her heart straining with hope for her sick child's recovery. Or you might see fishermen at dusk, huddled on the docks, promising their finest catch to Poseidon if he brings them home unharmed. Their hands shake as they place coins on the shrine, their voices quavering in prayer. Your relationship with the gods is intimate and personal, a mixture of awe, love, and sometimes stark fear. When an eagle soars overhead before you embark on a journey, you feel a surge of confidence, a sure sign of Zeus's blessing. But if a nightmare shakes your sleep, you rise at dawn to seek out a priest, anxious to decode the god's message before making any crucial decision. Whether it is choosing a spouse or deciding when to sow a new field, your social standing further shapes how you experience this divine dance. If you are wealthy, you commission grand sacrifices, slaughtering an ox in the temple courtyard, offering fine wines and elaborately embroidered cloth. You might even fund the construction of a new shrine or a mosaic depicting a god's deeds. Your actions set the religious tone for the entire city, and citizens look to you for cues on how to properly honor the divine. If you are poor, your offerings are more modest: stale bread, a handful of flowers from a neighbor's garden, whispered prayers offered at a roadside altar. Yet you believe these simple tokens carry weight if given sincerely, regardless of your wealth. You live with the conviction that the gods watch and judge, and that with enough respect, courage, and a bit of luck, you might earn a rare moment of favor. Sometimes you glimpse a world just beyond human reach. As a demigod, you are the child of a god and a mortal, never fully belonging to either realm. You might be able to lift stones that would crush a normal man or outrun the fiercest deer, but in quieter moments, you feel the sharp edges of your existence. Your mortal parent's love is real, but your divine parent watches from afar, sending blessings based on whims you cannot predict. When you wrestle with monsters or embark on dangerous quests, you know it is not just your strength or skill that matters. It is your ability to maintain the god's goodwill. At times, it feels as if you stand on a knife's edge. One act of impiety could squander your powers, yet a single suppliant prayer might earn you a victory beyond human grasp. If you rise to the status of hero, you learn early that courage alone is not enough. Before each quest, you stand at the threshold of a temple, offering sacrifice and begging for divine tools and guidance. You remember how in your own life you heard of Perseus receiving winged sandals from Hermes, a reflective shield from Athena, and a helmet of invisibility, a gift meant to ensure his triumph over the Gorgon. You understand that the gods reward both valor and proper homage. Theseus, Before entering the labyrinth to face the Minotaur, kneeled in prayer to Poseidon and Athena, knowing full well that their favor could be the difference between glory and oblivion. You carry their stories as a reminder that the gods' blessings can elevate a mere mortal into legend, but their wrath can bring even the strongest hero to ruin. If you are a ruler, king, queen, or elected magistrate, you see worship as essential to protecting your people. You oversee festivals, athletic contests, and theatrical performances as offerings to your city's patron deity. In Athens, you might organize the Panathenaic Festival, ensuring every procession and competition honors Athena, binding the citizens together in communal devotion. In Sparta, you lead the sacrifice to Apollo before marching your troops to war, making clear that your authority rests on the god's approval. Within your palace, you maintain private shrines where priests offer incense and prayers on behalf of not just your family, but the entire polis. When you commission a grand temple, like Croesus dedicating a lavish sanctuary to Artemis at Ephesus, you are not merely giving thanks, you are placing your name alongside the divine, staking your claim in the cosmic order. By funding dramatic rituals, feeding the poor during festivals, and commissioning poets to compose hymns, you present yourself as the vital intermediary between mortals and gods, ensuring that the entire city remains in harmony with forces far greater than any mortal king. In every layer of society, from the demigod carrying divine burdens, to the hero seeking favor for a perilous quest, to the ruler performing grand ceremonies, you live with the unshakable conviction that your fate and the fate of your community hinges on the god's whims. Your offerings, prayers, and sacrifices are not mere tradition. They are the lifeblood connecting the mortal realm to the divine, and as long as you draw breath, you remain ever vigilant, ever reverent, and ever hopeful that the gods, in their capricious glory, might smile upon you once more. You walk down the docks each morning before dawn, lantern in hand, the salty sea breeze ruffling your hair as you pause at a small stone altar dedicated to Poseidon. You pour a little wine into a chipped bronze cup, murmuring a prayer for calm waters and fair winds. As a merchant planning to set sail for distant markets, you know that every journey begins and ends with this ritual. If the sea grows angry, you'll hear whispers that you neglected Hermes' shrine in the marketplace, Hermes being your patron of travelers and trade, and you'll make a point to leave a fresh loaf of bread or a handful of incense there, hoping to restore his goodwill. You cannot afford a storm at sea or the loss of precious cargo, so these small offerings are woven into the rhythm of your days, reminders that your livelihood depends as much on divine favor as on shrewd bargains. Now step into the workshop where you practice your craft. Whether you shape clay in a potter's wheel or hammer iron by the forge, you believe Athena watches over your hands, granting you steady skill and ingenuity. In a quiet corner, you keep a tiny figurine of an owl, Athena's sacred bird, placed atop a shelf of tools. Each time you wipe soot from a freshly fired amphora or inspect the curve of a horseshoe you've just nailed, you touch the figurine and whisper, "Thank you, goddess." Sometimes you leave an olive branch next to it, a simple token of gratitude when your day's work goes smoothly, or when a particularly intricate design meets with praise from a customer. You understand that inspiration and success in your craft are gifts. Without Athena's watchful eye, each piece might miss both form and purpose. When war drums echo across the city or rumors of conflict swirl, you join other soldiers at a great communal altar to Ares, or stand beneath Athena's carved reliefs on the city walls, preparing for departure. You hold a goat's shoulder or a cup of wine, fingers trembling as you spill out your plea for courage and protection. You imagine Ares' eyes penetrating your armor, testing your heart's resolve, and Athena's wisdom guiding your sword arm. Before you march, you trace the sign of the goddess over your chest, warm, praying that your tactics remain sharp and that you return alive. In the heat of battle, you recall the smell of burning incense at that altar, how it rose straight and white, a promise of valor or a warning of doom. At home, life quiets, but the gods still command your attention. Each morning, you stir a handful of fine flour into your hearth's embers for Hestia, goddess of the hearth, believing that her presence keeps your house safe from cinders and your family united under one roof. The hearth's glow is your sanctuary. You press your palm to the warm stones and imagine Hestia leaning close to listen to your unspoken worries, especially when a newborn cry fills the room and you pray for the child's health. If a neighbor's house catches fire or sickness sweeps through the quarter, you hurriedly mix ashes with a few drops of olive oil and touch them to your forehead, asking Hestia's mercy and hoping to protect your own hearth from calamity. Even smaller events carry ritual weight. When you bring fresh water from the well, you pause to touch the lip of the clay jar to a tiny shrine at the path's edge. You leave a pinch of barley or a sprig of rosemary as a nod to nymphs believed to dwell in the spring, spirits who might send drought if angered. In the bustling agora, you pause before haggling over goods, touching a ribbon tied around a statue of Hermes, or dropping a coin into a sacred fountain, whispering a quick prayer for luck in the coming negotiation. You know that if you fail to acknowledge these presences, misfortune may follow you, perhaps in the shape of spoiled grain, a broken oar, or a child's sudden fever. As you look around at the people with whom you share this life, you recognize that each social role brings its own approach to the gods. Demigods, those born of a god and a mortal, roam among you, seeking answers about their identity and place in a world that never fully accepts them. Heroes pass through on grand quests, bargaining for favor that will carry them to glory, knowing that a token sacrifice to Apollo or Artemis could change the tide of their fate. Rulers, kings, queens, and magistrates organize festivals and games to honor patron deities, ensuring that their city remains blessed. But you, as an everyday Greek, look to the gods for comfort, luck, and protection on a far more personal scale. You understand that divine power is woven into every layer of society, and that your offerings, humble though they may be, connect you to the same cosmic tapestry that binds mortal and immortal alike. You live at the edge of a tilled field in a simple home of clay and wood, where the corners gather dust and the scent of earth mingles with hearth smoke. In one corner, you have fashioned a crude shrine from a rough-hewn stone slab. Upon it, you place a small clay figure, a stand-in for Demeter, goddess of grain and fields, and a chipped oil lamp whose wick still glows faintly from last season's lighting. Each dawn, before you tread into the soil, you break off a piece of coarse bread or pour a thimble of wine onto the shrine, murmuring a prayer that Demeter will grant you fertile harvests and gentle rains. You also offer a quick word to Hestia, who guards your hearth, and to any wandering spirits of grove or stream, praying they won't invite mischief upon your home or your family's health. You know that neglecting these daily gestures, no matter how small, could mean wilted shoots, blighted grain, or illness crawling through your village. Since the nearest temple is miles away, you've learned to keep the shrine in your home clean. Children help by sweeping away old ashes, replacing wilted herbs with fresh bundles they gather at dawn, and selecting the best ear of barley or newest flour as offerings. In spring, they weave a garland of wildflowers to drape over the clay figure. In autumn, they tuck a handful of newly harvested barley around its base. You watch them carefully, knowing that these small duties teach them that the gods sustain life itself. When you knead dough for bread or tend vines on your hillside, you feel the earth's pulse beneath your hands and whisper a thanks, hoping that in return the soil will yield enough to feed your family through winter. The soil will yield enough to feed your family through winter. When harvest season arrives, you perform the first fruits ritual with solemn reverence. At dawn, before anyone in the family tastes a single stalk of wheat or a sun-ripened grape, you lift the very best produce from your stores and place it on the shrine. You imagine Demeter leaning close to taste through your hands, and you await her blessing on the rest of the yield. This moment stands in stark contrast to the city dwellers you've heard about, whose offerings occur in massive temples built of marble, removed from the everyday soil they seldom touch. For you, divinity lives in every handful of earth and every whispered word. For you, divinity lives in every handful of earth and every whispered word. Arms raised and cast a handful of seed as an offering, trusting that this gesture will persuade Zeus to bless your fields rather than scorch them with drought or batter them with storms. When a sudden downpour drenches your crops, you stand in awe, knowing that Zeus's will is real and immediate, and you give thanks by placing a green branch of olive on your shrine at dusk. Community life centers on local festivals, without which life itself feels unbalanced. At planting time, you dance around bonfires under the glow of torches, singing songs in honor of Dionysus, god of wine and wild joy, so that your vineyards will grow strong and your grapes ferment into rich wine. Children leap over small flames. Adults raise clay cups of musty wine, and the air fills with the scent of roasted herbs. You understand that beneath the revelry lies a practical hope, warm. You understand that beneath the revelry lies a practical hope in hidden spots by a twisted oak or a bubbling spring. You place small cakes or tie ribbons to branches, acknowledging local nymphs said to dwell in those ancient trees and streams. You've heard stories that a nymph's favor can bring fresh water to a dying well or keep wolves from snatching lambs from your flock. So even as you bend to tend to daily chores, you never forget the presence of these minor divinities, whose power may touch your life in unexpected ways. In this world, divinity is not distant or abstract. It lives in the green shoot, breaking through the soil, in the thunder that ripples the sky, in the warmth of a crowded hearth under a cold night. Every touch of earth beneath your fingernails, every touch of earth beneath your fingernails, every breath of wind through the leaves, every flicker of oil in your lamp is a meeting place between mortal need and divine power. Simplicity deepens your faith. You do not require grand temples of marble or priests in flowing robes. Your connection to the gods is as immediate as the soil you till and the hearth that feeds you. Every touch of earth beneath your fingernails, every breath of wind through the leaves, every flicker of oil in your lamp is a meeting place between mortal need and divine power. Simplicity deepens your faith. You do not require grand temples of marble or priests in flowing robes. Your connection to the gods is as immediate as the soil you till and the hearth that feeds you. You live in a sacred world where every sunrise brings another chance to honor those you cannot see. You live in a sacred world where every sunrise brings another chance to honor those you cannot see. From the lofty halls of Olympus to the humble corners of your home, you have seen how gods and spirits are woven into every part of ancient Greek life. You've walked among merchants who echo Poseidon's altars before sea voyages, artisans who credit Athena for each stroke of their tool, and soldiers who beg Ares for courage at the dawn of battle. You've knelt beside peasants who leave first fruits for Demeter, danced around bonfires for Dionysus, and whispered home blessings for Hestia's protection. Whether you stand at a grand temple steps or tend a simple household shrine, whether you stand at a grand temple steps or tend a simple household shrine, you exist in a world where divine presence shapes your hopes, fears, and daily routines.